Around 2006 to 2009, the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya was on top of the world. It's fallen off a bit since then, becoming a bit more of a cult classic than the household name it once was, which has mostly coincided with a pretty long dry period in terms of major releases. But in recent years, there's been a lot more Haruhi-related material than usual, and it could even be argued the series is entering a sort of renaissance period. There was a new light novel in 2020, and now another one was just released this year on November 29th, 2024. But at the height of its popularity, the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya wasn't known for its light novels, or for any of its handful of spin-offs, or for either of its 2 manga adaptations. Instead, it was known for its anime. As far as adaptations go, it had its flaws, and a number of hotly debated creative choices, which is maybe a story for another day. But it wasn't bad by any means, and the film that concluded the anime series, The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, is highly regarded to this day. That said, the story of Haruhi Suzumiya doesn't end with her disappearance. So, if you don't want to read the books, but you still want to know more or less what's happened in the series so far that didn't make it into the anime, or if for some reason you want to jump into the new book without doing any back reading, you're in luck because that's what we'll be going over today. These won't be super in-depth summaries, but I'll be trying to cover plot stuff and connecting threads that are introduced in each story, and we'll be going in chronological order of when the stories take place, which is totally different from either way of watching the anime, and from the original light novel publication order, which is itself different from the order the stories were originally published in. The chronology in this series is kind of a mess, and I would say you get used to it, but I would be lying to you. We're going chronologically because I'm guessing the target audience for this video is primarily people who watched the anime, and broadcast order is a mess that has no relevance to the books whatsoever, which leaves chronological order as the logical choice. For similar reasons, I'll be glossing over things from the anime, including disappearance, and assuming that the audience is already familiar with them. We'll be touching on a couple of things that actually were adapted first, just where there are major differences I think are worth talking about. So in the books, Remote Island Syndrome is basically a completely different story. To start off, Kion's sister doesn't actually tag along, though she does try to. But most notably, the SOS Brigade all get blackout drunk 2 nights in a row, leading to some kind of off-screen happening with Kion and Haruhi that is only ever clearly referred to as disgraceful behavior, a description attributed to Koizumi. The underage drinking was presumably removed because of broadcast standards for the show's time slot. That said, the actual resolution of the mystery is the same, but the delivery of this information is pretty much completely different. There's no cave scene since they don't fall off the cliff, and Kion presents his deduction to Koizumi in a way that I have to guess just didn't make for very good TV, since it's really just a lot of talking. Fun fact about this one, the original movie version of Disappearance is such a faithful adaptation of the book that it still has Haruhi swear she'd never drink again, even though there was no drinking on this trip. The dub fixes this. The version of Endless 8 that we get in the books is, of course, exclusively from Kion's point of view. Because of that, we only ever see the last time loop. As a result, the anime's rendition has a different feel, but I think that both versions have their charm and both are worth watching. Well, experiencing, I guess? A fun fact for this one is that when Kion is watching Haruhi and Mikuru sleep during the stargazing scene, in the book he has a comment about how Haruhi is about as cute as Mikuru while she's asleep. This isn't important for any reason at all, I just think it's cute and more people should know about it. This story seems to take place a few days after Disappearance ends, sometime after Kion gets out of the hospital, but before school is out of session. Kion is called by a middle school friend, Nakagawa, who confesses that he has fallen in love with Yuki at first sight and has designed an entire life plan for the two of them. Kion considers this bizarre, quite frankly, but nevertheless presents the transcribed confession and proposal to Yuki the next day, along with an explanation. Yuki rejects his proposal with the reasoning that she cannot guarantee she'll still be autonomous in that time. When the rejection is presented to him, Nakagawa proposes that Yuki attend his football game in hopes that it will change her mind, and so the entire SOS Brigade attends. During the game, Nakagawa is injured, and Haruhi sends Kion and Yuki to go visit him at the hospital, where he confesses that he no longer has feelings for Yuki and is withdrawing his proposal. Later, Kion asks Yuki if she did something to cause that, and she explains that Nakagawa did not have feelings for her, but that this was a side effect of being able to see the data overmined through her. She removed that ability during the football game, presumably using the injury as some kind of cover-up. So this next one is an interlude that wasn't written by Nagaru Tanagawa, but can probably be presumed as canon, as it was published at the same time and in the same magazine as one of the other stories we'll cover later that was written by him. This one is written by So Sagara and is unique in that it isn't from Kion's point of view. Instead, this one is from Itsuki Koizumi's point of view. No major plot developments happen, just Haruhi briefly rewriting the universe via shogi. Mostly, I just wanted to mention a couple of minor details. The first is that outside of the dubbed version of the anime, Koizumi never refers to Kion as Kion or by name at all, which includes this short story. The second is that Koizumi brings up Kion and Haruhi's disgraceful behavior again and elaborates on it a bit, mostly to say that it was just flirting that was absolutely disgusting. Snow Mountain Syndrome is complicated. I could probably dedicate like 20 minutes just to this one, but in the interest of keeping this brief, let's just call it a fever dream that involves mathematics and overall foreshadowing for future events. In terms of major developments, Haruhi and Kion establish that they are both committed to looking out for Yuki as a priority, and Haruhi worries over her frequently from this point onward. Koizumi, meanwhile, affirms his loyalty to the SOS Brigade. Interestingly, this one appears to very briefly reference the events of Theater, the new book. This happens during the same trip as Snow Mountain Syndrome a little bit later. Nothing of consequence happens here. It's basically a sequel to Remote Island Syndrome, with most of the same cast, plus the addition of Kion's sister and Surya. Everyone's in on the mystery and nothing supernatural happens. Yuki pets a cat, I guess? Also, Haruhi continues fretting over Yuki. That is a consistent background detail during and after this story. This story actually takes place on a specific day, January 3rd. The SOS Brigade have returned from their trip to Surya's family's villa, with permission from Surya for the girls to borrow her kimono for their shrine visits, only requesting a picture of everyone all dressed up. Koizumi challenges Kion to guess the 3 prime numbers he's thinking about today. That probably sounds like it would be about as pointless as the last story, but it's got some fun moments in it that I think make the whole thing worthwhile. Mikuru asks Kion to spend some time with her, promising that they won't be doing any time travel this time. Instead, they do some shopping, but then a kid almost gets hit by a car and Kion jumps in to save him. Mikuru explains that the boy is the future inventor of time travel, and that the person who nearly hit him was trying to prevent the invention of time travel in the first place. She then has a bit of a breakdown about how nobody within her organization tells her anything about what she's supposed to do or what she is going to be forced to experience. The story ends on the revelation that Haruhi is this boy's tutor, and with her demanding an explanation as to what Kion and Mikuru were doing hanging out without her. In the prologue to Intrigues, Kion actually attends to the thing he left unfinished in Disappearance, traveling back in time to save himself from death by Asakura. This happens right before Random Numbers on January 2nd, and Koizumi complains about being left out of this little adventure throughout that story. I thought about moving this earlier because of the general weirdness of it in relation to the rest of the chronological order, but I wanted to keep specific books together, so here we are. Are you seeing what I mean about the chronology being a mess? In the actual plot, Kion stumbles on a second Mikuru in the club room, who was sent back from 1 week in the future not by her superiors, but on his own orders. Since she isn't able to explain, he has to piece things together while hiding her from the others and following her instructions as the week goes by. We discover why she went back in time toward the end, to act as a decoy when she's kidnapped by a faction that consists of espers opposed to Koizumi's organization, time travelers that wanted Mikuru specifically as a bargaining chip of some kind, and a different kind of alien interface. One of them is a guy who was insulting Kion earlier in the story and shows up again here alongside a new girl we haven't met before. This one features Haruhi getting into it with the student council president, who is apparently being paid off by Koizumi to keep her occupied. The SOS Brigade is tasked with putting together a literary anthology, as the occupants of the Literature Club's clubroom haven't done anything literature-related at any point in the past year. Not a whole lot happens, but we do get to see Yuki and Mikuru's contributions to the anthology, which I think is cool. We also get a side note that apparently they're on pretty good terms with the computer club now. The SOS Brigade receives its second ever client, a classmate of Kion and Haruhi named Sakanaka, one of few people outside of the brigade to actually be on good terms with Haruhi. There's some kind of spirit in her neighborhood that's distressing the local dogs, or so she claims. Yuki eventually concludes that the cause is actually a kind of data life form, and they solve the problem by transferring the data life form into Shami-san via some kind of folk remedy ritual due to Haruhi's involvement, since cats are unaffected by whatever this thing is. Also, Haruhi starts tutoring Kion on the side. I'm mentioning this because it comes up again later. These two books tell one connected story. The prologue to Chapter 3 in Dissociation, Chapters 4 to 6 in the first half of Surprise, and Chapter 7 to the epilogue in the second half of Surprise, which was originally released as 2 books. It's been a full year since the series began, meaning most of the SOS Brigade is beginning their second year of high school, while Mikuru is beginning her third and final year at North High. The student council president antagonizes Haruhi at the club fair, as he is being paid to do. A while before this, Kion stumbles across a friend of his from middle school, Sasaki, the weird girl that Kunikita has teased him about on and off throughout the series. Haruhi is less than pleased about this development. If that wasn't enough, it turns out that Sasaki's associates are the faction referenced in Intrigues, consisting of Kyoko Tachibana, representing a faction of espers that believe Haruhi's power should instead belong to Sasaki, Kuyo Suo, a strange alien interface from a different group that struggles to communicate, that group being responsible for the events of Snow Mountain Syndrome, and Fujiwara, fake name, one of the time travelers who opposes Mikuru's faction. Sasaki herself, though, isn't exactly thrilled about the prospect of becoming basically a god. The timeline splits when Kion receives a phone call. In one half, Yuki is sick and Haruhi is focused on looking after her. In the other, Haruhi fields potential recruits for the SOS Brigade, particularly an interesting young girl called Yasumi, who actually passes the challenges she'd set to drive away potential members. The two timelines eventually reconverge due to Yasumi's influence, resulting in a proper confrontation between the SOS Brigade and what I've been calling the Sus Brigade, in a layered closed space. Fujiwara orders Kuyo to bring Haruhi into the closed space so they can kill her, forcibly transferring her powers to Sasaki. Kyoko at this point decides that she's cool with kidnapping and all that, but she draws the line at murder, so she's out. Haruhi, floating in the air outside, begins to fall, and Kion jumps through the window to catch her. Right as he's bracing for the impending death that follows not thinking before you jump out a second-story window, he gets thrown around space-time like a ragdoll for a bit, briefly encountering a college-aged Haruhi and then waking up in her room sometime in May. After that incident gets resolved, he's finally returned home, and in the end, it's revealed that Yasumi was an aspect created by Haruhi to stop the Sus Brigade's plan from succeeding. Haruhi doesn't consciously know this, of course, but later says that Yasumi admitted to being a middle school student and so couldn't properly join them. I can't believe I forgot to mention this. This story also contains the glorious return of one Ryoko Asakura. So this short story actually takes place in Kion's third year of middle school, and explains where he picked up his trademark catchphrase. This is the story I mentioned earlier that was published alongside Tempo Loss. In this one, Haruhi wants to find the 7 wonders of North High. While she's otherwise occupied, the brigade brainstorms ideas that will appease her without making things too bizarre if she decides to make them real. Also, we meet a new character, T. Kion refuses to call her by her name, because it's long and hard to say, but also refuses to call her by her nickname. I mention this because she gets very offended at being called Hey You and Miss Mystery Society. As you might expect, Surya presents the SOS Brigade with a challenge. She's on a trip at the moment, so she presents it via email. Also, T is here again. Actually, Surya presents everyone with 3 separate challenges that are interconnected. Nothing of consequence happens here, but there's a lot of Surya personality and some insight into her life and history via her emails. The major revelation for this one is, as of right now, not relevant to the plot outside of this story. It's that Surya and T are good friends who have known each other since they were kids, and that Surya was the one to teach T how to speak Japanese, explaining some of the quirks of her manner of speaking. And with that done, we have now covered literally everything except for the book that just came out, which I haven't read yet. Maybe I should go do that now. Anyway, I hope this was fun.